I'll never forget the way the night started. It was a Saturday, one of those crisp evenings where the air smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke. My best friend, Jason, was hosting a party at his place. A casual thing, drinks, music, good company. Emily and I were both invited, of course. She insisted she'd meet me there since she had errands to run during the day. When I arrived, the house was buzzing with life. Laughter spilled out of the living room. The smell of barbecue wafted from the backyard, and someone was already killing it on the karaoke machine. Emily wasn't there yet, which wasn't unusual. She was always the type to make an entrance, to be fashionably late. But this time she wasn't just late. She was silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. I tried to enjoy myself, figuring she'd show up eventually. Jason handed me a beer and teased me about her queen of drama timing. I laughed it off, but something felt wrong. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't gut instinct. It was the absence of her. It was as if I could feel that she wasn't on her way. About an hour in, I spotted someone who made my stomach drop. Nick. Nick is one of those guys who sets off alarms just by existing. Charming, yes. Charismatic, absolutely. But there's something predatory about him. He's the guy who leans too close to married women and always manages to touch them in ways that seem casual but aren't. Emily hated him, or at least she used to. So when I saw him standing in the kitchen, laughing with a drink in his hand, my first thought was, why the hell is he here? Jason wouldn't have invited him. Jason knew I couldn't stand the guy. Nick caught me staring, smirked, and raised his glass like we were old pals. I ignored him, but my mind was already spiraling. Emily had mentioned him recently in passing. Something about running into him at the gym and how he looked different. It was a throwaway comment, but now it burned like acid. 2 hours passed. Still no Emily. My patience was wearing thin, so I stepped out onto the deck to call her. It went straight to voicemail. Twice. By the third try, I was pacing like a madman. People were starting to notice. Jason came out, asking if I was okay, and I brushed him off with some excuse about work stress. But in my head, I was already mapping out the worst-case scenarios. And then, like a scene ripped out of some bad movie, I heard a car pull up. I rushed to the front yard, relief mixing with anger. But it wasn't just Emily. It was Emily and Nick, in his car. They didn't see me at first. The music from inside was loud enough to drown out my footsteps as I approached. She was in the passenger seat, laughing at something he'd said. The sound of her laughter cut through me like a knife. She looked so comfortable, so happy. I stopped a few feet away, waiting for her to notice me. When she finally did, her smile froze, her eyes wide. Nick, ever the smug bastard, glanced at me and said, "Hey man, didn't know you'd be out here." I didn't respond. My eyes were locked on Emily. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. She stammered, reaching for the car door handle. "It's not what it looks like, Ryan. He just gave me a ride." "A ride?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call or text? Why is it always Nick?" Nick had the audacity to chuckle, as if this whole thing was some kind of joke. "Relax, dude. You're overthinking it." That's when I snapped. I stepped forward, yanking open the passenger door. "Get out of the car, Emily." She hesitated, but the look on my face must have told her I wasn't messing around. She climbed out, smoothing her dress like that would fix anything. "Ryan, you're being ridiculous. It's just a ride. You're embarrassing me." "Embarrassing you?" I barked. "You show up to a party with this guy, after disappearing all day, and I'm the one embarrassing you?" Her face flushed with anger, but before she could reply, Nick leaned out the window and said, "Maybe we should all calm down." I turned to him, my hands clenched into fists. "Get out of here, Nick, now, or I swear to God, you'll regret staying." For once, he listened. With a shrug, he backed the car down the driveway, leaving Emily and me standing there in the cold. The silence between us was deafening. She crossed her arms, glaring at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You're overreacting," she said finally. "Am I?" I shot back. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why do you lie, Emily? What are you hiding?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked into the house, leaving me standing there with 1,000 questions and no answers. When Emily stormed into the house, I followed her. Not because I was ready to let this go, but because I wasn't about to let her turn this into some casual brush-off. Inside, the party was still in full swing, oblivious to the storm brewing between us. People were laughing, music was pounding, and Jason was on the couch shouting at someone over a beer pong game. Emily made a beeline for the kitchen. I caught up to her just as she was pouring herself a drink, her hands trembling slightly. She noticed me watching and quickly steadied herself, flashing a forced, too bright smile. "Ryan, can we not do this here? You're making a scene." "Oh, I'm making a scene?" I snapped, keeping my voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "You show up hours late with Nick of all people, and I'm the one making a scene?" Her expression hardened. "It's not a big deal. I told you he just gave me a ride. My car wouldn't start." "Your car wouldn't start?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "That's the best you've got? You couldn't call me? Text me? Hell, Jason lives 5 minutes away. You couldn't ask him for help." She rolled her eyes, sipping her drink like I wasn't even worth the energy. "I didn't think it was a big deal, okay? Nick was there and he offered. End of story." It was the casual way she said it that sent my blood boiling. The way she dismissed everything. My concerns, my feelings, the fact that she'd been acting shady for weeks now. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think I'm stupid, Emily? You think I don't see what's going on?" For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Panic, maybe, but she covered it quickly, laughing like I told some bad joke. "Oh, come on, Ryan. You're reading way too much into this. You always do. Always do," I echoed. "What else am I supposed to think when my wife starts lying to my face? When she's sneaking around with him?" "Lower your voice," she hissed, glancing around like she was worried someone might overhear. "You're embarrassing both of us." "No, Emily," I shot back. "You embarrassed us the moment you climbed into his car." The tension between us was suffocating, but she didn't back down. She took another sip of her drink, her gaze cold and calculating now. "You're being ridiculous. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like some insecure little boy. Grow up." That was it. That was the moment I realized something had shifted. She had shifted. The Emily I thought I knew, the one who would have apologized or at least tried to explain, wasn't standing in front of me anymore. This Emily was defiant, condescending, and full of contempt. Before I could respond, Jason walked into the kitchen. He took one look at us and immediately knew something was wrong. "Hey, everything okay in here?" he asked, his tone cautious. Emily turned to him, her face lighting up with a fake smile so convincing it made me sick. "Oh, we're fine. Just a little misunderstanding, that's all." Jason glanced at me, his brow furrowed. He didn't buy it. "Ryan." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "We're fine," I said through gritted teeth, though my voice betrayed how far from fine I really was. Emily used the moment to slip away, disappearing into the crowd like nothing had happened. I wanted to follow her, to drag her back and force her to tell me the truth, but Jason grabbed my arm. "Hey man, what's going on?" I hesitated, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to tell him about the lies, the late nights, the way she'd walked in with Nick like it was nothing. But another part of me, the part still clinging to some shred of hope, held back. "Nothing," I muttered. "Just something we need to work out." Jason didn't look convinced, but he let it go. "All right, just let me know if you need anything." I nodded, barely hearing him as I scanned the room for Emily. She was nowhere to be seen. My heart was pounding, my thoughts spiraling. If she wasn't here to explain herself, where the hell had she gone? And more importantly, who was she with? It didn't take long to find out. 15 minutes later, I stepped outside to clear my head. The backyard was quieter, the only sound coming from a group of smokers huddled near the fence. And that's when I saw her, standing just out of view, talking to Nick. She wasn't laughing now. In fact, she looked serious, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But it didn't matter. The sight of them together, sneaking off like that, felt like a slap in the face. I moved closer, staying out of sight. Their voices were low, but I could just make out what they were saying. "This is getting out of hand," Emily was saying, her tone sharp, Nick chuckled softly. Relax, babe. He doesn't have proof. He's just pissed because he knows I can give you what he can't. My entire body went cold. The words hit me like a freight train, each one cutting deeper than the last. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep myself from charging over there and knocking him out. Emily didn't deny it. She didn't push him away or tell him he was wrong. She just sighed, looking frustrated but resigned, like she didn't care enough to argue. I couldn't listen anymore. I stepped into view, my voice loud and sharp enough to make them both jump. Give her what I can't, huh? Why don't you enlighten me, Nick? The look on their faces was priceless, pure, unfiltered panic. For once, Nick didn't have a smug response. And Emily? She looked like a cornered animal, her mouth opening and closing as she scrambled for an excuse. But there was nothing she could say. The truth was out, and I wasn't about to let it slide. For a moment, none of us moved. Nick, usually so quick with his smart-ass comments, just stood there frozen, his mouth slightly open. Emily's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. The tension was suffocating, but I wasn't about to break it. You heard me? I said, stepping closer. My voice was steady, but every muscle in my body was on edge. What exactly are you giving her that I can't? Nick finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than usual. Look, man, you're blowing this way out of proportion. We were just talking. I scoffed, glaring at him. Talking? That's what you call this? The late-night rides? The sneaking around? And now this? You think I don't see what's going on? Emily stepped in then, her face a mask of irritation. Ryan, stop. This isn't the place for this kind of drama. Drama? I said, turning to her. Are you serious right now? You're out here, sneaking off with him, and you have the nerve to call this drama? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. I've already told you, nothing's going on. Nick is just a friend. You're making a fool of yourself, Ryan. Nick decided to chime in, his cocky attitude creeping back now that he thought Emily had his back. She's right, dude. You're embarrassing yourself. Why don't you just go cool off? That was it. The dam broke. I stepped forward, my fists clenched, and for a split second, I thought about decking him right there. But instead, I laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that caught both of them off guard. You know what, Nick? I said, my voice dangerously calm. You're right. I am making a fool of myself because I actually believed she was better than this. Better than you. Nick flinched, his smug grin faltering. Emily, on the other hand, looked furious. You're unbelievable, she hissed. You're acting like some paranoid psycho. Maybe if you spent less time playing detective and more time being a decent husband, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Her words hit me like a slap. Not because I believed them, but because I realized how far gone she was. This wasn't guilt or remorse. It was pure deflection. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was angry at me for catching her. I shook my head, my voice thick with disbelief. You really think this is my fault, don't you? You think I'm the problem here? She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. I think you've been smothering me for months. You don't trust me, you don't respect me, and now you're out here causing a scene like some jealous teenager. Maybe if you weren't so insecure, we wouldn't be in this mess. Nick shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting things to escalate like this. Maybe we should all just... Shut up, Nick, I snapped, cutting him off. He raised his hands in mock surrender, but he didn't leave. Of course he didn't. He wanted to see how this played out. I turned back to Emily, my voice low but firm. You know what? Fine. Let's stop pretending. Let's stop playing this little game where you act like the victim and I'm the bad guy. Tell me the truth, Emily. Right here, right now. Are you sleeping with him? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Emily's face turned pale, her bravado cracking for the first time. You're insane, she said, her voice shaky. I can't believe you'd even ask me that. Answer the question, I said, taking another step closer. Yes or no? Are you sleeping with him? She hesitated, her eyes flickering to Nick. That was all the confirmation I needed. I let out a bitter laugh, my heart pounding in my chest. You don't even have the guts to deny it, do you? God, I was such an idiot. I gave you everything, Emily. Everything. And this is how you repay me. Her expression hardened again, but she didn't say anything. Nick, ever the opportunist, tried to step in. Look, man, it's not what you think. Emily's been unhappy for a while. Maybe if you actually paid attention to her. That's when I snapped. I grabbed Nick by the collar, slamming him against the fence before he could finish his sentence. Don't you dare try to pin this on me, I growled, my voice trembling with rage. You don't get to come into my life and play the savior. You're nothing but a snake. Jason must have heard the commotion because he came rushing out, followed by a few others. Ryan, man, what the hell are you doing? He shouted, pulling me back before I could do any real damage. I let go of Nick, shoving him aside. He stumbled, muttering something under his breath, but I didn't care. My attention was on Emily now. She was standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, looking more angry than afraid. We're done, I said, my voice cold and final. You want him? You can have him. But don't you dare try to blame this on me. For the first time, she looked genuinely shocked. Ryan, wait. No, I interrupted. You made your choice. Now live with it. I turned and walked away, ignoring Jason's calls and the murmurs of the crowd. My mind was racing, my chest tight, but one thing was clear. Whatever I thought I had with Emily, it was over, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down any further. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. I drove home in a daze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The world outside the car felt distant, just streaks of light and shadow rushing by. My chest was tight, my head pounding, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. Her hesitation, the flicker of guilt in her eyes, Nick's smug, self-righteous tone. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked almost eerie, quiet, still, like it knew something had shattered inside me. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the dark windows, wondering how the hell I had ended up here. The life I'd built with Emily felt like a cruel joke now. Every memory, our wedding, the vacations, the lazy Sundays on the couch, felt tainted. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had she spent with him while I was at home, trusting her, loving her? I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe some kind of proof, something concrete to confirm what I already knew. My fingers hovered over her messages, her emails, but I stopped myself. No, not yet. I needed her to come home first. I needed to hear it from her. I waited for hours. Midnight turned into 1 a.m., then 2. I'd expected her to follow me home, to storm in and try to twist the knife further. But she didn't. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, at 2:30, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. My pulse quickened as the front door opened, and Emily walked in. She froze when she saw me sitting on the couch, the only light coming from the dim lamp in the corner. You're still up, she said, her voice flat. Of course I'm still up, I replied, my tone just as cold. We need to talk, she sighed, setting her purse down on the counter. Ryan, I'm not doing this with you tonight. I'm exhausted. Too bad, I said, standing up. We're doing this now. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter like she was already bored of the conversation. Fine. What do you want to talk about? I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. How long? Her brow furrowed. How long what? Don't play dumb, Emily, I said, my voice rising slightly. How long have you been seeing him? She rolled her eyes, her posture stiffening. Ryan, you're being ridiculous. There's nothing going on with Nick. I've already told you. Stop lying to me, I shouted, my voice echoing through the quiet house. I heard you, Emily. I heard what he said. Giving you what I can't? What the hell does that mean? For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then finally she spoke. You really want to know? She said, her tone sharp. Fine. I'm tired of pretending. I've been unhappy for a long time, Ryan. And yes, I've been spending time with Nick, because he actually listens to me. He makes me feel wanted. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Wanted, I repeated, my voice cracking. I've given you everything, Emily. I've supported you, loved you, trusted you. And this This is how you repay me. She threw up her hands, exasperated. You think love is enough? You think showing up and paying the bills makes you some kind of saint? God, Ryan, you're so clueless. Clueless, I said, stepping closer. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer, and you have the nerve to call me clueless? She didn't back down. If anything, her gaze grew colder. You want the truth? Fine. Nick's right. You're not enough for me anymore. You haven't been for a long time. Her words knocked the air out of me. I felt like I was drowning, my chest heaving as I struggled to process what she just said. You don't even care, do you? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't feel guilty. You don't feel anything. She shrugged, her expression defiant. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm tired of feeling guilty for wanting more than this boring, predictable life with you. Something inside me snapped. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that made her flinch. You want more, I said, shaking my head. Go ahead, Emily. Take it. Take Nick. Take your more. And get the hell out of my house. She blinked, caught off guard by my sudden shift. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steadier now. Get out. Pack your things and go. I'm done. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, her chin lifting defiantly. Fine, if that's what you want. It's not what I want, I said, my voice cracking again. But you've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But when I didn't, she turned on her heel and walked toward the bedroom. I could hear her moving around, pulling things out of drawers and slamming them into a suitcase. As I stood there in the living room, my hands shaking and my heart shattered, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my pain. This was just the beginning. But at least now I knew the truth. And that was something. It wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken, but it was enough to start over. The sound of her suitcase wheels dragging across the hardwood floor echoed through the house. It was surreal, like watching a stranger leave. She was wearing the same dress she'd left in earlier that evening. Black, sleek, a dress that once made my heart race. Now it just made my stomach churn. Emily didn't look at me as she pulled the suitcase toward the front door. Her expression was set, her chin high like she was walking away from something she had already decided wasn't worth saving. For a second, I thought she might stop, say something, anything, to acknowledge the wreckage she'd left behind. But she didn't. Where are you even going? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, finally turning to face me. Her face was calm, too calm, but her eyes betrayed her. There was something there, anger maybe, or fear. To Nick's, she said bluntly. No hesitation, no shame. My chest tightened, and I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. Of course. Straight to him. Huh? Not even pretending to figure things out. Just done. She rolled her eyes, as if I was the one being unreasonable. What's the point of dragging this out, Ryan? You said we're done, and you were right. There's nothing left here. Nothing left, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. You're unbelievable, Emily. I spent 6 years building a life with you, and you're walking away like it's nothing. Like I'm nothing. Her expression hardened. Don't act like you're some saint, Ryan. You were checked out long before I was. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. You were never really there. I stepped closer, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. You don't get to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. I was there, Emily. I was there for every argument, every tough decision, every goddamn moment you needed me. But you... My voice broke, and I forced myself to continue. You weren't. You were already halfway out the door. Weren't you? I just didn't see it. For a moment, she looked like she might respond. But instead, she sighed, shaking her head. Believe what you want. It doesn't matter anymore. Her apathy hit me harder than any argument ever could. I felt the last thread of my patience snap. You know what, Emily? Go. Run to Nick. But don't come crawling back when you realize he's nothing but a selfish, manipulative asshole who only wants what he can't have. Don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. Don't worry, Ryan. I won't. With that, She opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. She didn't look back, didn't pause, didn't say goodbye. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. For a while, I just stood there, staring at the door. My mind was blank, my body numb. It was over. Really, truly over. The person I had loved, the person I had fought for, was gone. And the worst part? She had taken a piece of me with her. I slumped onto the couch, my head in my hands, the weight of the night crashing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It all hit me at once, like a tidal wave I couldn't escape. But beneath all of it, a new feeling was starting to surface. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was something sharper, darker. A need to reclaim what she had taken from me. A need to show her, and him, that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. I didn't know what my next move was. Not yet. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hours after she left passed in a haze. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't even turn on the TV to drown out the deafening silence in the house. My mind was a storm, replaying every argument, every lie, every godforsaken second of the night over and over again. The anger burned like gasoline, refusing to die down. But beneath the anger was something else. A gnawing, relentless curiosity. I needed answers. Not her half-truths or Nick's smug insinuations. I needed to know everything. How it started, how long it had been going on, and, most importantly, if there was anything she thought she'd gotten away with. At 4 a.m., I made my decision. I grabbed her old laptop from the closet. It had been collecting dust for months after she switched to a newer model, but I knew she hadn't wiped it. Emily wasn't the tech-savvy type. If there were any breadcrumbs, they'd be here. It took me less than 5 minutes to log in. She hadn't even bothered to change the password. The familiarity of it all felt strange, like stepping back into a part of her life I wasn't supposed to see. But tonight, I didn't care about boundaries. The first place I looked was her email. First, nothing jumped out. A few receipts, work-related junk, the occasional spam ad for luxury handbags. But then I saw it. A folder buried near the bottom of her inbox, titled Simply Personal. I opened it and my heart dropped. The emails were all there, dozens of them. Messages between Emily and Nick, going back months. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The tone was unmistakable. Flirty, intimate, full of inside jokes and thinly veiled references to their meetups. One email in particular caught my eye. It was from 2 weeks ago, sent late at night. Subject: Tonight. Thanks for meeting me tonight. I needed that more than I can say. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up with Ryan. He's starting to suspect something. But being with you makes it all feel worth it. You understand me in a way he never could. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my chest tightened. She didn't just betray me. She planned it. Every word confirmed what I had already feared. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. She had chosen him over and over again, while I was left in the dark. But the worst part? There was an attachment. A photo. My hands shook as I clicked it, and when the image loaded, my stomach turned. It was a selfie of the two of them, taken in what looked like the lounge of a fancy hotel. Her head was on his shoulder, her smile radiant, her eyes lit with a joy I hadn't seen in years. And Nick, he looked victorious, like he knew exactly what he was taking from me. I slammed the laptop shut, the image seared into my brain. My breathing was ragged, my hands trembling with a mix of fury and humiliation. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity, the smugness, the way she paraded around with him, confident I'd never figure it out. That was when I realized something else. The email had a timestamp, 10:47 p.m. It was the same night she told me she was out late for work drinks. The same night I'd sat at home, waiting for her, thinking she was tired when she came back reeking of perfume. I clenched my fists, the pieces clicking together in my head. The hotel in the photo wasn't just any hotel. It was the same one downtown where Jason had mentioned Nick was hosting his company's networking events. That's where they were meeting. That's where it had been happening. A new plan began to form in my mind, sharp and crystal clear. They thought they'd gotten away with it, but they hadn't counted on one thing, me. I wasn't going to sit here and lick my wounds while they laughed behind my back. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking back control. By the time the sun started to rise, my path forward was set. I wasn't going to be the fool in their story. I was going to rewrite it. And when I was done, neither of them would ever forget the day they underestimated me. The clarity I felt that morning was unlike anything I'd experienced before. No more tears, no more second-guessing. Emily and Nick thought they had me cornered, that I'd slink away quietly and let them have their twisted little romance. But they didn't realize who they were dealing with. I spent the next few hours planning every move with the precision of a chess master. I wasn't interested in petty revenge. This needed to be flawless, public, something that would leave no doubt about who they were and what they'd done. My first stop was Jason's house. He was my best friend, but more importantly, he was the key to making this work. When I showed up at his door, bleary-eyed and running on caffeine and adrenaline, he knew something was wrong. "Jesus, Ryan, you look like hell," he said, pulling me inside. "What happened?" "I need your help," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Emily's been cheating on me. With Nick." Jason's face darkened, his usual easygoing demeanor vanishing in an instant. "That piece of, are you serious? When? How long?" "Months," I said, my voice cold. "And I have proof. Emails, photos, the whole damn circus." He shook his head, muttering a string of curses under his breath. "I can't believe this. I knew the guy was bad news, but Emily? I never thought." "Yeah, well, now we know," I interrupted. "And I need your help to expose them." Jason's eyes narrowed. "What do you need?" That's the thing about Jason. He's the guy you call when you're in a tight spot. He doesn't ask questions, doesn't hesitate. And right now, I needed someone like him. "Nick's hosting another networking event at that hotel downtown," I said. "Emily will be there. She's too predictable not to go, especially now that she's staying with him." Jason nodded slowly, catching on. "And you want to crash it?" "Not just crash it," I said, a grim smile forming. "I want everyone there to know exactly who they are and what they've been doing." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You've got a plan?" I nodded, pulling out my phone. "We're going to play this smart. First, we need a little surveillance, something concrete to catch them in the act. And then, when the moment's right, we blow it wide open." Jason grinned, his anger now matching mine. "All right, let's burn this guy to the ground." Phase 1, the bait. The networking event was scheduled for the following evening, giving me just enough time to set the stage. Jason and I scouted the hotel during the day, figuring out the layout and where Nick was likely to hold court. He always loved being the center of attention, so the bar lounge was a safe bet. By the time the event started, Jason and I were in position. He was stationed at the bar, casually nursing a drink, while I waited in a corner booth with a clear view of the room. I'd brought a small recording device, nothing fancy, but enough to capture the conversations I needed. It didn't take long for them to arrive. Emily walked in first, wearing a dress that was too showy for anything professional. Nick followed close behind, his hand on the small of her back like she was his trophy for the night. My blood boiled, but I stayed calm. This wasn't the time to act. They mingled, laughing and chatting with other guests, but it was clear they were there for each other. Nick kept touching her, her arm, her waist, her shoulder, and every time he did, I felt the knot in my chest tighten. Jason gave me a subtle nod from across the room. We'd agreed not to approach them directly, not yet. Instead, he made small talk with one of the event staff, casually steering the conversation toward Nick. "Yeah, that guy," Jason said loudly enough for me to hear. "Big shot, always bragging about his business deals. Kind of a snake, though, if you ask me." The staff member laughed, agreeing. "You're not the first to say that. He's always here with someone new. Last month it was that brunette from marketing, and now..." Jason raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "The blonde? She his assistant or something?" "Nah, just his girlfriend, I think. They're pretty cozy, though." I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of the table. Jason gave me a quick glance, his expression saying it's working. Phase 2, the trap. An hour into the event, Nick and Emily slipped away, heading toward the elevator. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I followed at a distance, Jason trailing behind me as backup. Sure enough, they went to a private suite on the top floor. I stayed out of sight, watching as they disappeared behind the door. My heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't just rage. It was anticipation. Jason handed me a small camera we'd brought, already set up to record. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded, my jaw tight. "Absolutely." We waited for a few minutes before I knocked on the door. I could hear them inside, their muffled voices laughing at something. The sound made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to stay composed. When the door opened, Nick's expression went from cocky to panicked in an instant. "Ryan, what the hell are you doing here?" Emily appeared behind him, her face paling when she saw me. "Ryan, this isn't." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. I held up the camera, the red light blinking. "Smile for the camera, lovebirds. Let's give your colleagues something to talk about." Nick's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. This is private property." I laughed coldly. "Private property? That's rich, coming from the guy screwing another man's wife. Don't worry, Nick. I'm sure your boss will appreciate knowing how you spend company events." Emily tried to grab my arm, her voice desperate now. "Ryan, stop. This isn't the way to handle this." I shook her off, stepping back into the hallway. "Oh, I think it's the perfect way. Enjoy the fallout." I turned and walked away, the sound of their frantic voices echoing behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to satisfaction. This was just the beginning. By the time I made it back to the hotel lobby, my adrenaline was starting to wear off, but the satisfaction was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. Jason was waiting for me by the bar, his face tense with anticipation. "Well?" he asked as I approached. I held up the camera, the recording indicator still blinking. "Got it," I said, my voice cold. "Everything I needed." Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Damn, man, that's next level. What's your next move?" I sat down at the bar, motioning for a drink. "They're going to try to spin this," I said, my voice steady. "Nick will use his connections, and Emily will do whatever she can to make me look like the crazy one. But I'm not giving them the chance." Jason frowned, leaning in. "You sure you want to escalate this? You've got them dead to rights. Isn't that enough?" I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "No, they didn't just cheat, they humiliated me. They thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd roll over and let them get away with it. I'm done playing nice." The plan was already forming in my mind, crystal clear and unstoppable. First, I needed to make sure the video ended up where it would hurt them the most. Nick's company had a strict code of conduct, one that explicitly forbade personal scandals that could tarnish their image. If his boss saw that video, his career would be over. And Emily? Her betrayal wasn't going to stay behind closed doors. Phase 3, the public unveiling. The next morning, I uploaded the video to a secure server and drafted 2 emails. The first was addressed to Nick's boss, a man named Greg Parker. I kept it professional, attaching the footage and explaining the situation in detail. "I thought it was important you see how one of your senior managers conducts himself during company-sponsored events," I wrote, keeping my tone factual and detached. The second email was for Emily's inner circle, her friends, her colleagues, and most importantly, her parents. I didn't include the video, just a brief explanation of what had happened. I wanted them to hear it from me before she had the chance to twist the narrative. By the time I hit send, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. The ball was rolling now, and there was no stopping it. The first domino falls. It didn't take long for the responses to start pouring in. Around noon, I got a call from Greg Parker. His voice was clipped and professional, but there was no mistaking the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Mr. Daniels, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," he said. "This behavior is unacceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed immediately." "Glad to hear it," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I just thought you should know what kind of person is representing your company." By the time the call ended, I knew Nick's career was hanging by a thread. Then came the messages from Emily's friends. Most of them were shocked, their texts filled with disbelief and apologies. A few were angry, accusing me of airing dirty laundry and ruining her reputation. But I didn't care. The truth was out, and I wasn't about to apologize for it. The real blow came later that evening. Emily's desperation. It was around 9 p.m. when my phone started buzzing relentlessly. "Emily," she called 6 times in a row before I finally picked up, my finger hovering over the decline button every time. When I answered, her voice was frantic, almost hysterical. "Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "More than you, apparently," I said coldly. "What's wrong, Emily? Did Nick's boss not appreciate his little extracurricular activities?" "You've ruined everything," she shouted, her voice cracking. "His job, my relationships. My parents won't even talk to me. Why would you do this? Why would I do this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Are you serious right now? You cheated on me, lied to me, and dragged my name through the mud. Don't you dare act like the victim." She was silent for a moment, her breathing heavy. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said finally, her tone desperate. "Ryan, please, we can fix this. We can figure it out." "Fix this?" I snapped. "There's nothing to fix, Emily. You made your choice. Now live with it." She started to say something else, but I hung up, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. She wasn't my problem anymore, and neither was Nick. The collapse. Over the next few days, the fallout continued to spread. Nick was suspended from his job pending a full investigation, and word of the scandal began circulating through their social circles. Emily's friends were divided. Some supported her, but others turned their backs, disgusted by what she'd done. I stayed out of it, watching from a distance as their perfect little world crumbled. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. But the best part? I wasn't done yet. Emily and Nick thought the worst was over. That much was obvious from the silence that followed. For days, there were no calls, no texts, nothing. I knew them too well to think they'd just given up. They were regrouping, trying to salvage whatever was left of their lives. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't finished. The truth was, I hadn't just stumbled onto Emily's affair. I'd uncovered her entire house of cards, and it was time to knock it down for good. The secret debt. A few days after Emily walked out, I decided to check the joint accounts we'd shared during our marriage. I wasn't expecting much. She rarely touched them since she preferred her personal credit card. But what I found was enlightening. A series of large withdrawals had been made over the past 6 months, each one labeled as personal expenses. Thousands of dollars gone, siphoned into an account I didn't recognize. I felt the blood drain from my face as I scrolled through the transactions. Designer clothes, extravagant dinners, even a weekend spa retreat. All while I was at home, completely unaware. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft. I spent the next few hours digging through old financial records, piecing together the pattern. Emily hadn't just been spending recklessly. She'd been draining our savings, slowly and methodically. And for what? To fund her little double life with Nick? It was the final straw. The evidence piles up. Armed with this new information, I contacted a lawyer first thing the next morning. She was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. "You have a strong case," she said after reviewing the evidence. "Between the infidelity and the financial misconduct, you could argue for both fault-based divorce and restitution." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "I don't just want her out of my life. I want her to feel it." The lawyer smirked. "Then you're in luck. With what you've provided, we can not only freeze her access to the remaining funds but also potentially recover what she's already taken. And if Nick was complicit in any of this, we can drag him into the proceedings too." Hearing that was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. For the first time, I saw a way to turn their betrayal into justice. But there was one more thing I needed to do before pulling the trigger. The public spectacle. Emily and Nick had been keeping a low profile since the video and emails circulated. But I knew that wouldn't last. Nick was too arrogant to stay quiet for long, and Emily was addicted to appearances. So I decided to speed things up. Jason and I put together an anonymous social media post, detailing the entire affair in painstaking detail. The photos, the emails, the financial records, it was all there. We didn't name names directly, but anyone who knew them would recognize the story instantly. Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in, a mix of outrage and morbid curiosity. People started connecting the dots, tagging Emily and Nick in the replies. The scandal that had been simmering under the surface exploded into full-blown chaos. By the end of the day, Emily had deactivated her accounts. Nick tried to defend himself with a half-hearted post about privacy and misunderstandings, but it only made things worse. Screenshots of his attempts to flirt with other women surfaced, painting him as a serial manipulator. The final confrontation. That evening, Emily showed up at the house unannounced. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she still had a right to be there. "Ryan," she started, her voice trembling. "What the hell have you done? That post, it's everywhere. People are calling me, texting me. My life is falling apart." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Good," I said simply. "Now you know how it feels." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel a shred of pity. "You've destroyed me," she whispered. "Why? Why couldn't you just let me go?" I stepped closer, my voice cold and unyielding. "Let you go? Emily, I did let you go. The second you walked out of here and into his car, you were gone. This," I gestured around us, "isn't about keeping you. It's about making sure you never get to pull this crap again. Not with me, not with anyone." She shook her head, her composure breaking. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you're the victim. But you weren't perfect, Ryan. You weren't enough for me, and you know it." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. "You're right," I said quietly. "Maybe I wasn't enough for you, but that doesn't justify what you did. And now, you're not my problem anymore." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but she must have seen the finality in my expression. She turned and left without another word, slamming the door behind her. The collapse of their empire. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was complete. Nick lost his job. Greg Parker didn't waste any time terminating him after the investigation confirmed his inappropriate conduct. Word spread quickly through their industry, blacklisting him from most reputable companies. Emily wasn't faring much better. Her parents, furious about the affair and the financial damage, cut her off completely. Her friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. I, on the other hand, felt like I was finally coming up for air. The divorce proceedings were moving quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence my lawyer presented. Emily had no choice but to agree to my terms, and the court ordered her to pay back a significant portion of the money she'd stolen. For the first time in years, I felt free. But more importantly, I felt vindicated. I hadn't just survived their betrayal, I'd risen above it. And now, as their carefully constructed lies came crashing down around them, I realized something. I didn't just win. I'd made sure they lost. Life felt strangely quiet after the storm settled. For months, my existence had been consumed by betrayal, anger, and the need for justice. Now, standing in the ruins of what once was, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. The divorce was finalized in record time. Emily didn't fight me on the settlement. She couldn't afford to. Between the public disgrace and the financial burden the court placed on her, she was cornered. Every dollar she'd drained from our accounts was now legally ordered to be returned. It would take her years to repay it all, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Nick, predictably, had disappeared. Word was he'd skipped town, probably hoping to start over in a place where people didn't know what kind of person he was. Good riddance. And Emily? I didn't hear from her after that final confrontation. Not directly, anyway. A few mutual friends mentioned she was staying with a cousin on the outskirts of the city, barely making ends meet. Part of me thought I'd feel vindicated knowing she'd hit rock bottom, but instead, I just felt indifferent. She was a chapter one had closed, a part of my life I no longer wanted to revisit. The clean slate. With the divorce behind me, I threw myself into rebuilding. The house felt like a mausoleum of bad memories, so I sold it. The process was bittersweet. Every corner of that home was filled with reminders of a life I thought I'd have, but letting go of it felt like shedding dead weight. I moved into a smaller, modern apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No ghosts of the past, just a fresh start. Jason, ever the loyal friend, checked in on me often. One night, over a couple of beers, he asked the question I knew was coming. "So, what's next for you, man?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I thought about it for a moment, staring out at the city lights through my window. "I don't know," I admitted. "I spent so much time fighting to get here, I haven't thought about what's next." Jason smirked. Well, whatever it is, you've got a clean slate now. No baggage, no lies. Just possibility. Possibility? I repeated, letting the word roll over me. For the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. Felt hopeful. The final letter. A few weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Emily. I debated throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, the smell of her familiar perfume wafting up as I unfolded the letter. Ryan, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But I needed to say it anyway. I was wrong. About everything. I thought I wanted freedom, excitement, something new. But what I really wanted was to escape myself, and I used you as an excuse. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I know that now. Nick's gone. It didn't take long for him to show his true colors once everything fell apart. I guess karma caught up to both of us in the end. I hope you find happiness, Ryan. Real happiness. The kind I wasn't able to give you. You deserve that much. Emily. I set the letter down, staring at it for a long time. Her words didn't bring closure. They didn't undo the pain she'd caused. But they felt final. Like a coda to a story I'd already finished reading. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Looking forward. Months passed, and slowly but surely, I started finding pieces of myself again. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, even took a solo trip to the mountains. A dream I'd put off for years. The best part? I didn't feel like I needed anyone else to complete me anymore. I'd been to the bottom, clawed my way out, and realized I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. One day, while sitting on a bench overlooking the city, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the revenge. It wasn't a path I'd ever expected to walk, but now that I'd reached the other side, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd seen the truth, no matter how painful it was. Grateful that I'd had the strength to fight back. Grateful that I'd reclaimed my life. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Life had a funny way of reminding you of things when you least expected it. Months after the dust settled, just as I was finally feeling like myself again, an old echo from the past found its way back to me. It was a Saturday morning, quiet and calm. I was drinking coffee on my balcony, flipping through a book I'd borrowed from Jason, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Emily's mom. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Of all the people connected to Emily, her mom, Linda, was the last one I'd expected to hear from. She'd always been kind to me, like the mother I never had. But after the scandal, I figured she'd sided with her daughter, like any mother would. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Ryan. Linda's voice came through, soft but uncertain. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, it's fine, I said, leaning against the balcony rail. What's going on? There was a pause, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I wanted to check on you, see how you were doing. The words caught me off guard. I'm doing okay, I said slowly. Why? Another pause. Then, her voice dropped, tinged with guilt. I know it's not my place, but I wanted to apologize for everything Emily put you through. I raised her better than that, or at least I thought I did. Her words stirred something in me, a mix of sadness and frustration. It's not your fault, I said after a moment. Emily made her own choices. Linda sighed. I know, but it doesn't make it any easier. I've tried talking to her, but she won't listen. She's so lost, Ryan. And I don't know how to help her. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell her Emily wasn't my problem anymore. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good years, couldn't help but feel a flicker of pity. She'll have to figure it out on her own, I said finally. You can't fix this for her. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked, Do you think there's any chance she could make things right with you, even as friends? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing down on me. Linda, I said gently, I think it's best if Emily and I stay out of each other's lives. Too much has happened. There was a long silence on the other end. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with regret. I understand. I just thought I'd try. You were the best thing that ever happened to her, Ryan. I hope you know that. I did my best, I said simply. But it wasn't enough for her. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling the familiar ache of old wounds reopening. I told myself it didn't matter, that Emily's choices weren't mine to fix. But the conversation stayed with me, lingering like a shadow, a chance encounter. A week later, I ran into Emily by accident. It was at a coffee shop downtown, one I hadn't been to in years. I was grabbing a quick espresso before heading to a meeting when I saw her. She was sitting by the window, staring down at her phone with a faraway look in her eyes. She looked different, thinner, maybe paler. Her once meticulously styled hair was tied back in a loose bun, and the light in her eyes, the one that used to draw me in, was gone. She didn't see me at first. I thought about leaving without saying anything, but something in me stirred. Maybe it was closure I hadn't realized I still needed. I walked over, my footsteps light against the wooden floor. When I stopped in front of her table, she looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice almost unrecognizable. "Emily," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Didn't expect to see you here." She gestured awkwardly to the seat across from her. "Do you want to sit?" I hesitated, then nodded, lowering myself into the chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. "You look good," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Better than the last time I saw you." "Thanks," I said. "You look different." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, life's been complicated." I didn't ask her to elaborate. I wasn't here for her confessions. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked bluntly. She flinched at the directness of my tone, but to her credit, she didn't look away. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I leaned back, studying her. "You already said that in the letter." "I know," she said quickly, "but it didn't feel like enough. I've been trying to figure out where I went wrong, why I ruined the best thing I ever had. And I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Emily, stop. I don't need your apologies. What's done is done. We can't go back and fix it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I know. I miss you, Ryan. I miss us." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I thought about the life we used to have, the good times before everything fell apart. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the look on her face as she defended Nick. "I don't," I said finally, my voice firm. "I've moved on, Emily. And you need to, too." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," she whispered. I stood up, slipping a few bills onto the table to cover her coffee. "Take care of yourself, Emily." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. Seeing her again had reminded me of how far I'd come, and how much better I was without her. This time there was no anger, no pain, just peace. The day after my encounter with Emily, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Seeing her again, hearing her apologies, and walking away without the weight of bitterness. It was the final piece of closure I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an open door, waiting for me to step through. Building something new, I started throwing myself into projects that gave me purpose. I took on new challenges at work, volunteering for leadership roles I'd always shied away from. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted apart from during the years I'd been tangled in Emily's web. Jason remained a constant, always pushing me to move forward. One evening, he dragged me to a charity event downtown, insisting it would be good for me to meet new people. "You never know," he said with a sly grin. "Maybe you'll meet someone." I rolled my eyes but went along with it. The venue was buzzing with energy, people mingling, sipping cocktails, and bidding on silent auction items. For the first hour, I stuck close to Jason, exchanging polite small talk with strangers and avoiding anything that felt too forced. Then I saw her. She was standing near a display of local artwork, studying a painting with an intensity that made her seem oblivious to the chaos around her. She wasn't flashy or overly polished, just natural, confident, and quietly radiant. Jason noticed me staring and gave me a nudge. "Go talk to her." I hesitated. What am I even supposed to say? "Anything," he said with a grin. "Just don't let her leave without trying." With a deep breath, I made my way over. She turned as I approached, her eyes meeting mine. "Hi," I said, trying not to sound awkward. "I'm Ryan." She smiled, her expression warm and inviting. "Nice to meet you, Ryan. I'm Claire." We ended up talking for the rest of the evening. She was an architect, passionate about her work, and had a quick wit that kept me on my toes. There was no pretense, no games, just easy, genuine conversation. By the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see her again. And for the first time, the idea of starting something new didn't scare me. A letter to myself. A few weeks after meeting Claire, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the revenge. It had all been part of a painful but necessary journey. One evening, I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and started writing. Not to Emily, not to anyone else, but to myself. "Ryan, you've been through hell and back, but you made it. You proved to yourself that you're stronger than you ever thought possible. You learned to stand up for yourself, to fight for your dignity, and to let go of what no longer served you." Emily's betrayal was devastating, but it was also a blessing in disguise. It forced you to see the cracks in your life, to rebuild from the ground up, and to create a future that's truly yours. Don't hold on to anger, it only weighs you down. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Keep moving forward, Ryan. You're exactly where you're meant to be. When I finished, I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. It wasn't something I needed to share. It was just a reminder to myself of how far I'd come. The future beckons. As weeks turned into months, my connection with Claire deepened. She wasn't a replacement for Emily. She was something entirely different. A partner who met me as an equal, who brought light and laughter into my life without conditions or hidden agendas. One evening, as we sat together on my balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me with a curious smile. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the same way I used to. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It's just a part of the story." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "Well, I'm glad it brought you here." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I wasn't the man who'd been betrayed anymore. I was the man who'd survived, who'd grown, who'd built a new life on his own terms. And for the first time, I wasn't just moving on, I was moving forward. The end of one chapter had become the beginning of another. And this time, I was ready to write the story I truly wanted to live.